Unpleasant emotions are unpleasant because they are supposed to be disruptions that are uncommon for our everyday life. What we bring you in awe is to point out that their intensity comes from the fact that they are rare and recognizable as serious. No, there's a clear distinction between baseline default of what we had in social media expression back then and the oversaturation of dishing out right now in the status quo. There's a clear misunderstanding involved about this because back then, absent the rise, expressions are far healthier in those discussion chambers that we have. I'll discuss that more later. Compare that in their side, where oftentimes it results to the erosion and the decisive factor of discourse that you will have. Over time, we told you that this weakens the people's ability to process emotion properly since they learn to externalize instead and dramatize feelings alongside the social intuitions or social institutions that amplifies this instead of understanding and resolving them first. First issue then, and I think the debate primarily hinged on this issue, whether turning these emotions into visible public culture helps people process pain and seek support better, or instead weakens their ability to regulate and understand their feelings privately and proportionately. I'll also talk about the macro issue under this. Gulf response goes in two folds under this issue. One, there's a stigma to frustrations and vulnerabilities prior to the rise. Number two, the repeated exposure creates normalization, which makes people talk about these problems better. I can see the case of Gov here, that if people are far more open, the society at large can create a better discussion chamber and create norms on how this discomfort should be resolved, since you can get a lot of opinions from the other side, like from the other side of the country, etc., etc. The problem is they need to show these three things. First, they need to prove that more discussion actually leads to a better resolution. The problem is that openness doesn't automatically produce good guidance. Very often, it produces the echo chambers that we have talked about from top of the bench, which remains unresponded into from the bottom down of their bench. The internet doesn't just gather empathetic people, and that's the problem. It also gathers opportunists. It also gathers the ideologues and communities that profit from giving you a villain and telling you, like, you are the hero of your own suffering. This is exactly why Joseph's radicalization point lands still within this debate, because Andrew Tate does this often to men who feel humiliated or rejected by women. They become the messiah of these frustrations that they post under subreddits with Andrew Tate, for example. Radical feminists, for example, as well, do create or mirror this image in their own direction. So the issue is not whether people find community. I think the issue, and I also don't think the issue is whether algorithm is self-correcting, since all of our circumstances varies, and oftentimes we are the ones who are proximate to resolve this in the first place. The issue is what kind of community they find and online, and that the answer is that oftentimes it leads to an echo chamber, and that feeds our resentment rather than resolution, since oftentimes we have a confirmation bias when we are so emotional and where we are so direct. So oftentimes when people point out their opinion about your issue, like, maybe it's not within your own ground, you are less likely to accept this varied opinion from varied people that they need to talk about in golf. So golf's picture of simple camaraderie is just simply unrealistic when most people scrolling through social media do not know your life, do not know your context, and are filtering your fame through their own biases in the first place. What is the effect of this? First, at the micro level, individuals do not actually get resolution. What they often get is reinforcement. They are pushed deeper into communities that validate the worst interpretation of their pain, give them someone to blame, and reward them for staying aggrieved rather than moving on. We all have confirmation biases, just like what I talked about. It's not like you will listen to someone who wants to call you out as well if your frustration is your own fault, when you yourself are frustrated and emotional already. So that means that the person becomes less likely to confront the real causes of the problem, and less likely to hear difficult but useful advice, and less likely to process the emotion in a way that leads to actual recovery because of the actual oversaturation of it. Second, at the macro level, this corrodes the culture of discussion in itself. Once more and more conversions are actually filtered through echo chambers, society becomes more polarized in how it understands pain, blame, and responsibility. Like how people stop approaching discomfort as something to be resolved and start approaching it as something to be weaponized, moralized, and turned into identity due to the oversaturation of identity that we have talked about. Second part under this, they need to prove that the more discussion actually leads to more I don't know, to the means of better discussion, which is the quality versus quantity that Joseph talked about. Because our problem is not the expression in abstract, our problem is on scale. So once unpleasant emotion becomes visible to the public convention, we actually pointed out that people are rewarded for escalation. They're rewarded for performative framing. They're rewarded for making every problem sound maximally grave because that is what gets attention, affirmation, moral validation. Sure, I'll take the POI.
This performative action that you are running your case on is true only in certain cases, but in most of the cases when people are so fucked up, I don't necessarily understand why they will care for this. But then even if people go ahead and do this performative shit all the time, then I don't understand from your own framing that how these echo chambers are likely to be sustainable.
The problem is, in order for you to get those varied opinion, you need to actually make it more trending. So you need to get a lot of this performative action. And also the problem within the rise, just like we have talked about, is that it breeds a lot of people in oversaturation in comparison to the default baseline like what we had back then. I think the most probable result is that what you can see right now is that people get trained into externalizing first and understanding later. They post in threads, in Facebook notes. And by the way, this is the reason why Twitter is toxic in the first place and why the indoctrination of these spaces are also harmful for the people on the middle ground. They post before they think, they dramatize before they calibrate, and that is the problem in your side. Third, you need to prove that there was some unique stigma that happens before the rise that only their word resolved. I also don't think that's true because even before the rise, people already talk about discomfort, frustration, heartbreak, loneliness. Facebook in 2011 already had this. Reddit was literally built around anonymous disclosure and niche emotional communities. If your only impact here is access, we ask access to what? Harmful discussion, echo chamber. So the claim cannot just be before no one could speak. Like literally, people could speak before. The question was whether they were respected, believed, or attacked. And that does not disappear in golf because in both words, stigma does exist, especially when your frustration challenges someone else's beliefs or identity. If you complain about your girlfriend, some people will understand you or some people will attack you. If you complain about your mother, you will face diverse opinion that can decide your own decision. Compare that to our comparative of having to deal and cope with these problems and seek for actual institution of support, or at least this incentivizes you to push forward without bootlicking to the public because you literally can just take care of yourself without coercing into the public pressure of deciding for your own life. So the difference is on golf is that you do not face the people that are already in your life. You now invite the whole public into the conflict in comparison to the less saturated version of it back then.